just a little bit of my background. I grew up as a pastor's kid. I was pastor's kid in the womb. I am still a pastor's kid. My dad did worship ministry for 25 years, and he is now a lead pastor. And my sister and I both had a great experience as being part of the ministry family. We were always first to get there, first to get there, turn everything on, last to leave, turn off the lights. And we loved it and I fell in love with the church at an early age. But I was very shy, and I had an interest in music, but I didn't want my parents to know because I was very shy, and I didn't want to have to talk about it because talking about it would be awkward. I loved ministry, but I didn't really want to pursue it in any way until I went to a youth winter camp, and I felt the Lord's call on my life um, for ministry, worship ministry specifically. And I went home and shared with my family, and my parents were like, "Well, there's this prophetic word over your life when you were 5, and part of that was that you would be a worship leader." And so they're like, "We waited to share that with you until you heard the call for yourself, if and when you did." And so I'm really grateful that they waited so that I could get a word call on my own, because I'm a very analytical person, and I know that I probably would have looked at that camp experience and thought, like, was this just emotion? I was young. Did I imagine it? So having that really concrete, like, okay, this is something the Lord has for me, what he wants me to do. I jumped in the deep end right away, and I joined the worship team in the youth group and started to learn how to play keys. And I took vocal lessons from my parents, and then interned in high school, as well as I interned at a few different churches when I was in college, and studied pastoral leadership and music at my university. And then post-college, I worked at the Assemblies of God headquarters office for the states of Washington and Northern Idaho. And I was in the children's ministry department specifically. So we would plan like kids conferences, leader conferences, uh, kids camps for all of the AG churches in those states, which is sort of where my background of event planning came from, which is I used all of those skills this weekend, and it's been super fun. But really, that was the start of that job. Was the start of this love of resourcing, and I was the children's director's admin. And so the children director would go around and he would kind of insult all the other children's pastors at Assemblies of God churches in those states. So we kind of referred to it as he was the pastor to the pastors. And so it started to reveal this deep need for community and supporting one another in that way. And then from there, I went on to work at a couple other churches, and now am a worship pastor. And this is my first time as the worship pastor, like lead in that role. So it's a little bit about my background, and I share that because a lot of that has shaped who I am, but also how I do ministry and how I think and how I operate. And for me, I think a lot of what we're going to talk about, it has shaped sort of my definition for a lot of this. So a key part of that being community. I believe that uh, it's so vital to have community within the church, but I believe that community is an expression of worship, and I'll get into that in a minute. But first, I want to give some definition to when we're talking about worship. So I'm not talking about just 3 to 4 songs on a Sunday morning. That is a form of worship. That is an expression of worship, a way to worship. But I believe that the Sunday service experience should be the sentence to the end of your week of worshiping the Lord, that you have worshiped him in lifestyle and action, and the coming together on Sunday is the final sentence, the period to that sentence, that there has already been worship having led up to that. And this is it is unfortunately a cliche, but there's so much truth to it that worship is a lifestyle. It's not just singing, it's not just the Sunday experience, but worship is what you devote your focus, your priorities, and your heart posture towards. And then I believe that is based on what you're worshiping. It's based on your convictions and your dedication and your obedience. And so because of that, it can't be based on feelings or emotions. It has to be based on convictions and dedication and obedience. And one of the prime examples that came to mind when I was thinking about this is Daniel 3 with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The king of the province of the time, he decided that he wanted to be a god in his own right. So he set this decree that said, I want the people to worship me instead of God. And I'm going to make this mandate that people will worship me at this time every day. And if people didn't, there was severe consequences for that. And so these three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they said, you know what, we are so convicted and dedicated to the Lord, and we are going to worship him only and follow his commands to have no other gods before him. And they decided that they were willing to face any consequence because of that conviction and that dedication that they had and then the obedience to that. And they got busted and they were taken in, and the consequence of not worshiping the king was to be thrown into a fiery furnace. And the scripture says that the heat off of the furnace was so intense that the guards throwing them in died by heat exposure because it was so intense. And the king said to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he's like, I'll give you another chance. Like, you can worship me and I'm not going to throw you into the furnace. And they said, you know what, we believe in God, and we're going to worship him and serve him, and we'll deal with whatever the outcome is. We believe that he can save us and protect us, but even if he does not, we are still so deeply convicted and dedicated to him that we will face those consequences. So we get to see the end of that story, and they did throw them into the furnace, and they looked in, and they actually saw not just the three but a fourth walking among them. So God not only protected them and provided for them, but he walked with them alongside them in their very fiery trial. So that is such an example of that's not 3 to 4 songs on a Sunday. Like, it can't be. It's from such a deeper place than that. And so for me, that begs the question of, okay, well, how do I figure out what is my purpose and why? What is my purpose here? What is my existence? What is God like? What is this relationship with God? What does my relationship with him look like? And how am I to orient myself before him and my lifestyle with him? So with worship being not just the act itself, but looking at who you're worshiping and why you're worshiping. And again, it's kind of a cliche, unfortunately, but it's so true that we're all worshiping something, whether we realize it or not. It's what you're putting as the top priority of your heart and what you're attributing worth to. And it could be things that are inherently good. It could be family, work, ministry. It could be things that are all great things, but those things cannot take the place of the Lord as your King and Savior. You have to worship him first and foremost. My pastor he gives the staff this reminder often of, are you spending time with Jesus because you have a relationship with him, or because you're pastoral staff? Like, is your relationship with him beyond just the ministry that you're doing on the weekends? So you have an ongoing relationship with him. And so just keeping in check, like recognizing, okay, who or what are we worshiping? And if we're off kilter, how do we align and center our hearts and minds back on the Lord? And so I think that we start with looking at our purpose and our existence. Why were we created, and for what purpose? So with this, I look at Genesis 1-3, going back to the very beginning. It says that we were created in God's image for the purpose of glorifying him. So then for me, that begs the question, well, what is God's image? What is the image we were created in? And I believe that is communal. God is 3 in 1. He is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And when he created mankind, he said, let us make mankind in our image. And then not only that, but he dwelled with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and he walked alongside them. And there's this sense of camaraderie and relationship and familiarity, to the point where it talks about he walked with them in the cool of the day. Like, they had this rhythm and this relationship together. And then we know that Adam and Eve were tempted, and they gave into that temptation, and sin was ushered into the world. And so we have this perfect and holy, righteous God, and he creates everything, and he says that it is good, but he still gives us free will and decisions and choice. Adam and Eve are tempted, and they decide to give into that temptation. And so now you have this perfect, holy God, righteous God, and this flawed, sinful humanity. And so the two could not exist in Eden in the same way from that point on. So there was a separation, physical separation that took place. Adam and Eve were removed from the garden. But what I see from that point on is that there was this journey of provision of the Lord still making a way for his people to be able to access his presence, for him to dwell with them, even if not in the same way on this side of eternity, even if not in that Eden state exactly. That there was provision made so that we could be atoned for and made in right standing with him. And so I want to talk just briefly about so worship is communal, and I want to talk about this in context of what we see in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. And I think that all of this context, and this is going to be a very quick sort of overview of some of my thoughts, but all of this context again will act as a form of discipling you and deepening your convictions and therefore attributing why you're worshiping, that purpose of worship, and how you're worshiping. So from that point on of sin entering the world, things had to be a little bit different. And so God gave his people the instruction to build the temple and to offer sacrifices of atonement and restoration, even if in part restoration via the priesthood. And so these are the books of the Bible that you probably skip: Exodus, Leviticus, because they're boring. And there's a lot of detail in there where it's like, why do I care about all of the measurements of the temple and the sacrifices and the animals? And it's very tedious detail, but there is some really impactful correlation to Jesus and to pertaining to us today. So the temple, there were three parts of it. The outermost part, people had access to it. Anybody could just kind of be there. The middle was reserved more for the priests, and they had a little more access to it, but there was still some regulations, and only certain people could be there. And then the innermost room was called the Holy of Holies, and that was where God's presence physically dwelled through the Ark of the Covenant. His presence was physically there. And what separated that middle room from the Holy of Holies was a veil or a curtain. And there's a lot of detail in the books about that curtain, and even the thread that was used and the significance of the colors. And shout out to our church has been going through the book of Exodus, and one of our speaking pastors just did a sermon on some of the significance of the detail of that curtain. So if you're interested, I can get you connected with that recent sermon. But that curtain was an example of a physical barrier and separation. And so then if you fast forward to the New Testament and Jesus comes on scene, you have a little bit more of this understanding of the temple and the priesthood and what was required of them. And the priests, they could go into the Holy of Holies, but only on certain days and times and with certain sacrifices. And there was just a lot of hoops that they had to jump through. And again, it was a person, a priest, taking sacrifices on the people's behalf. And so the people didn't have direct access to God. There was that curtain of separation. They had to go through another person. And even that person who was interceding for them was flawed. And so you begin to understand some of that. And then when Jesus comes on, you're like, oh, Jesus talks about, I have come not to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. Oh, there's language in the New Testament that talks about, now that Jesus has come and died on the cross, we are the new priesthood, and now we are the temple, and we don't have to go to a physical place where God's presence dwells, because God's presence dwells with us and among us, and we are now part of the holy priesthood. And all of that language, again, those books that you tend to want to skip in the Old Testament, all of that starts to come to fruition in the New Testament of, oh, I now begin to understand a little bit more about how this is applicable to me. And I mentioned the curtain specifically. One of my favorite details is just kind of a side tangent, but one of my favorite details in 3 of the 4 Gospels point this out, that when Jesus was on the cross and he gave up his last breath and he died, it says that the veil, the curtain in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, which I love that detail, because if you think about, like, if fabric is hanging, so it's secured on the top, if you pull at it, it's going to start to fray and tear where it's the most vulnerable, which is not at the top where it's secured, but maybe the middle you'll get a tear, but it's probably going to tear at the bottom, and then the tear will go from bottom to top. But I don't know, the authors of those gospels make a point to say it tore, so it's just hanging there. Jesus gave up his last breath, and then it just like combusted and tore from top to bottom. But that was, again, that's it. You look at it at face value and like, oh, that's kind of random and kind of weird. But you as you dive into the context of who is this God that we're serving, what has he done, what is the significance of his sacrifice, it takes you, it enables you to be able to worship with not just more head knowledge, but the ability to have those deeper heart convictions and a dedication to him. And so for me, it's kind of like, how could you, once you begin to dive into that, like, how could you not want to worship him? So worship is communal. God has gone to these lengths to restore his people to that Eden mentality. Again, um, even if just in part on the side of eternity, we believe Jesus is returning, and then he will usher in the new heavens and the new earth, and then we will be fully restored to that Eden state of dwelling with him. But in the meantime, like, he has come, Jesus was fully man, fully God. He went to the cross on our behalf. He became the ultimate atoning sacrifice, and he now functions as the ultimate high priest on our behalf. And so I just love all of that, the connection of that language, and understanding those the significance of all of that. So for me, um, in my opinion, as you begin to understand, again, you have that head knowledge, you begin to understand, and you come in with this heart posture of worship, I think that should change how you think and how you live. So, first and foremost, how you think. So now you understand yourself in light of, I was made in God's image. Here's the lengths of his love and what he has done to give me the choice of relationship with him, because it is still a choice. It's still an option to you. Um, I understand more of all that he has done, and now having that better understanding of why you were created and your function. Now you can look at, okay, where am I placing my hope and my confidence in him and in that, or am I placing my confidence in something else? um, Jesus in Matthew 16:24 instructs us to die to self. So I believe that part of this worship as a form of discipleship is this dying of self, to deny self, to pick up his cross instead. It says that in Matthew 16:24. If we go back to the example of Adam and Eve, we see that our default is to think about self. What's in it for me? What do I get out of it? It's very isolated, and it's very self-indulgent, and it's the opposite of who God is, his communal nature. It's in conflict with that. And that's how the serpent tempted Eve. It was with this, what enticed her was this knowledge apart from God, that, oh, you can be autonomous. Did he really say that? Oh, well, he's trying to withhold something from you, but you can have it all on your own. So our default is to think about self, to protect self. And not only that, we're also, at least I am, finicky, wavering, unreliable. I doubt myself daily, if not on an hourly basis. And so I can't put my confidence or put my hope in myself or in my emotions or in my circumstances. I have to die to self and put my hope and my confidence in Jesus. And I believe that should shape, again, not just the Sunday morning, but how you're living your life every moment of every day. And this is not to say not have confidence in yourself. The theme verse of this conference is Mark 12:30, which is, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. God gave you a brain. He wants you to be discerning. He wants you to use your brain. I encourage things like, take care of yourself. take a speech class, go to a workshop, see a therapist, have a mentor, like keep your body rested and healthy so you can have a clear mind. Like take pride in yourself, take care of yourself, have a sense of self-confidence. But you can't, what I'm talking about is you can't put your hope and your eternal confidence in self, because that foundation will be shaky. Only the foundation of Jesus and who he is and what he's done, that is the only strong foundation. And then from that place and that posture do we live out this lifestyle of worship. So Isaiah 66, I wanted to highlight this. Now I understand this context, and yet the Lord has made a way possible for me to engage in his presence and engage in his kingdom. And this is the type of person that he wants, that the type of person that he responds to. Isaiah 66, 1-2. Thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What is the house that you would build for me? And what is the place of my rest? All these things my hand has made, and so all these things came to be. But this is the one to whom I will look, he who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. So again, dying to self, coming to him with humility, seeing yourself in light of his provision and his mercies, cultivating your heart and your mind and your soul, being diligent and proactive in working on and improving yourself and striving towards goals and cultivating the fruit of the spirit and advancing his kingdom. But a word of caution, and this is for myself as well. You still have to safeguard. Yes, God is communal, and yes, he wants a relationship with you and has gone to lengths to offer that to you, but he is still the God of the universe and you are not. And the moment that you try to put yourself in equal standing with him, priorities are off. And so that's where this part of humility and contrition comes in. Of he wants relationship with you, but he is still and always will be the God of the universe, and we have to approach how we live and how we operate with that reverence and humility. And so finally, this also changes actions and how I engage with others. This frame of mind, it becomes this filter for how I now see others. So I understand how now I see myself in this light. I understand how God sees me and what the type of relationship he wants to have with me, and now that becomes the filter for how I see others. And so now, rather than seeing others through a lens of maybe comparison or jealousy or idolizing them, I now see them as beloved by God, and it compels me to share him and his word and that opportunity for Eden community. And so sometimes for me, this could be as simple as just smiling at somebody, giving really intentional time and care, maybe praying with somebody in the middle of the grocery store. Feels weird, but I've done it, and it can be really impactful for both, not just the person being prayed for. So it doesn't have to be this weird, like you stand on the table in the middle of the mall food court and shout the gospel at people. Like it can be this just really intentional of seeing people through the lens of how God sees them, and living this lifestyle of worship. So I am going to get into I'm going to shift gears here in a second and get into some more practical ministry stuff. But I just wanted to share some thoughts. And again, this is more holistic worship as a lifestyle. The purpose of this session, this is in the heart spiritual session. So we are staying a little bit more kind of heady and theological, but my hope is that you can still have some things you take away and you can reflect and sort of chew on them. Of, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do with this? Where do I need to adjust and realign, and better live a life of worship holistically? So having said all that, I obviously do believe that a form of worship is music. Dan, I think that in the corporate space on a Sunday morning is important. I think that there is also a difference between personal and the corporate worship. So I'll get into that in just a second. But I do believe in musical worship in church, and literally my job to facilitate that at our church. And so I am passionate about it. But again, it's an expression of worship. It's not the only way. It's an expression in addition to studying scripture together, living in community with fellow believers, prayer, etc. But why music, and why music as an expression of worship in the church? First and foremost, scripture talks about it. And so I think what better reason than that? Psalm 33 says that praise from the upright is beautiful. And it then goes on to instruct to praise with instruments and to sing a new song to God. And then there's also, and this is just a few examples, these are not the only examples, but there's also very clear instruction for how to conduct worship or singing in the corporate setting. In 1 Corinthians 14, Paul is outlining the structure for that corporate gathering of believers coming together. And he says, whenever you come together, each one has a hymn, a teaching, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation, and everything is to be done for the building up. I love that a hymn, that music is included in that list. So, like I said, worship is the period to the sentence of your week. You are living a life of worship unto the Lord, being discipled in that way, worship as a form of discipleship all week. Sunday morning can't be your entire relationship with Him. And so this is where I believe there's the difference of personal and corporate worship. So that Monday through Saturday, your services are on Sundays. That Monday through Saturday, how are you finding space for that personal time of worship with the Lord? And then Sunday functions as the kind of the overflow, the outpouring of that coming together all together as the body to admonish one another. And going back to that 1 Corinthians 14 passage, Paul talks about that everything done in that corporate setting is to build up the body, and that's for the strengthening of us as believers, so that we can go out and fulfill the Great Commission, share the gospel, and make disciples. So the corporate setting then is to encourage and challenge one another, pray together, study the word, worship and glorify God together. And there is just something like about singing in a room with 200 people versus wherever your personal time of worship is, if it's a room in your house or your car or whatever. Like it's powerful, and it's exciting, and it moves you in a different way than that personal time of worship. So both are important and vital to the believer. I don't think you should have one without the other. But I think that there are in particular songs that are better suited for personal time of worship versus the corporate. And this is where I'm going to get maybe a little bit more practical. I have an opinion that the personal songs of worship, those are the songs that are maybe more self-reflected in nature. They're more maybe an attitude of contending. And the corporate worship songs, for me and how I structure my ministry, I try to keep it what I call upward focused. So my goal on a Sunday morning, as we're all coming in, I'm thinking about I'm being mindful of if there's new believers or maybe people who don't know the Lord yet. But I want to make sure that songs are attainable for everybody in the room. But I'm also thinking about what theology are we teaching in our songs, and what are the lyrics that maybe need a little bit more context unpacked, or what content do I want people kind of chewing on as they lead and they go about their week. I think that part of why this time is so impactful, the singing portion of your service, is because melodies stick with people and music moves people. And I don't even have to sing the song Baby Shark, but all of you now probably have that song stuck in your head for the rest of the day. You're welcome. Because that melody is catchy, but music and melodies stick with us. And I believe that people will often leave a service, and maybe by the time they get to the restaurant for lunch, they've forgotten the 3 points of the pastor's sermon. And it could have been a great sermon, but they've forgotten the 3 points of the sermon, but they're still humming the melody of those worship songs. And so for me as a worship pastor, that's why I'm so intentional about, okay, what theology is being taught in those worship songs. I have heard people say, they take kind of this, what would maybe be called like a seeker friendly or attractional model, where they're considering the new believer coming in, and we don't want anybody to feel like confused or not understand. So we keep our worship songs just really easy to comprehend, maybe more surface level. And I think that's a fine approach. But I have a friend of mine, Carrie, shared at last year's Creative Tides worship leader workshop. And he's like, I started taking jujitsu, and all of the terms for things were in a different language that I didn't speak. And so I asked what they meant, and the teacher explained to me what they meant. And now I know, and now I could do those things. And it was just this like very, and he was translating that, comparing that to worship. Like maybe there's a lyric in a song or a concept in a song where you need to explain it and you need to give some context. But I don't think we need to water it down or think that people won't be able to follow that. We don't need to treat people like they're dumb. Like right. Take the time, be intentional, explain the context. But I don't think that we need to shy away from teaching theology in our worship songs. And so um sometimes I will take time to explain context for the lyrics, or sometimes I have a progression that I want to take people through and how I want them to think and respond. But my goal at the end of every service is for people to come in however they're coming in, that they would be able to take their eyes off of themselves and off of what's been going on. And that doesn't mean that all of the responsibilities go away. It doesn't mean that hardships go away. And I'm not expecting them to forget about that, but to help them come into the space and lift their eyes up, lift their eyes off of themselves and lift their eyes on Jesus. And us coming into that space as a church, as a body, to all do that together. And so I will often pick songs that, again, are upward focused in nature, of how can I help people lift their eyes to Jesus and walk away understanding more about the gospel truth, and take a step in responding to him. And so for me, lyrical content is so important in that way, and I believe is a way that we can, if you're a worship leader in the room, that's a way that you can disciple your congregation, is through what theology are you teaching them in the songs that you're leading every week. And that's not to say that some of those more self-reflective songs don't work in that space. I think they do. Um, I still use those songs. I try to pair them with upward focused songs, but I think it is beautiful to have those personal reflective songs and the whole church all taking that moment of personal reflection all together. But for me, ultimately, it's how am I helping people to lift their eyes to Jesus and respond to him in that way. Um, so in kind of wrapping up a little bit what I had here, again, worship is how you live your life. It's where you set your affections and your devotions, what you put your confidence in, and it's how you respond in both the personal, private time of worship before the Lord, and then how you engage and encourage each other in the corporate setting of worship. And so maybe music in particular isn't your thing. That's okay. I as much as I love worship music, and it is my job to facilitate that, it's not the number one way that I personally connect with the Lord. I connect with him through walking and praying, and me just sitting down listening to music is not how I feel connected to him. So music and singing, it's an expression of worship, and it is beneficial in that corporate setting. But ultimately it's where you're setting your affections and how you respond. Uh, Deny yourself, pick up the cross of Jesus, and pursue him in humility and contrition, allowing his spirit and his truth to dictate your every response, perspective, and action. So again, kind of heady. This is more of a bunch of my thoughts that I hope are helpful, or at least you have little nuggets you can take away and just kind of chew on and evaluate and say, um, how can I implement this? How can I wrestle with this in my context of my personal relationship with the Lord, but as well as how you're living that out if you're a ministry leader, or just how you're living that out in your workplace, your school, your family. Um, so just kind of using worship and that expression of worship as a way to disciple ourselves and those around us and in our churches. So I wanted to leave some time if there are questions. We can dialogue a little bit. If or if you have thoughts or insights that you would like to share, it doesn't just have to be questions from me, but I'd love to just leave a little space for us to kind of chat about that. And yeah.
I was super interested in the you shared about the like Sunday morning being the final sentence for the week, because I do it the opposite, and so I want to hear a little bit more about that. So like the way I've always kind of thought about it is like in the traditional Jewish sense, and I'm as Gentile as a Gentile gets, but I'm Scandinavian. So like, but like it was like the idea of like the work week and then the Sabbath at the end, and then like the church starting meeting on the Lord's Day on Sunday. And so I've always kind of viewed it as we start together and then go into the week, and then like at the end of the week we end the week and then we start together in it. So that's always how I view it. So I was really fascinated that you kind of think of it like kind of the other way around. And so I was curious like
Yeah.
if it's always like that, or you like developed into that, or how
I
you got
think
there.
both perspectives work.
Yeah, I don't think either's right or wrong.
Yeah, we're essentially saying the same thing. I think I came to that point though, thinking through the lens of a volunteer. It's their weekend. It's Sunday going into Monday, which is the start of the new week. And so I think for me, it came from this place of encouraging them like, hey, you can't come. Sunday is, especially when you're scheduled on team, that's a serving and a pouring out. And hopefully they're still able to have connections and to worship even as they're leading, but more than likely that's the pouring out. And so I want them to come filled to pour out. And I think in my mind, I still think of it, even though Sunday's technically the start of my work week, I still think of it for myself too as like that's the end of my weekend, and then I shift into starting a new week. But yeah, I guess to answer your question, it's more I'm thinking through a volunteer lens of if you're coming and you're serving, I want to make sure that you're filled up and you're ready to pour out and serve, and you're not just running on fumes on Sunday morning.
To speak to that, I mean, you've done such a great job with your systems and help with this conference and all the things I see you do. You're always doing something. It's great to see. Can you give us some like real world examples of how at Bread Hills you're using worship? For me, it's challenging because I always feel like the volunteers like I'm asking of them versus pouring into them. Of course, I want to be aware of that, but like you're saying, Sunday's such a limited time.
Yeah.
So, what ways do you pour back into them? Obviously, this is one.
Yeah.
But aside from this, like, what are some little ways that you would suggest, like finding that balance of putting back into discipling them past Sunday?
Yeah. A couple of my team members are in the room, so as I answer, I I think one I think about like taking care of physical needs, and so we feed them every Sunday that they serve, and it used to just be what
Their worship. They all just left it.
but it's a long day. Like for us, we have a really small building, and so we're running 3 services, and our call time is 6:30, and we're not done until about 12:30. So that's a long stretch to just run on donut holes and coffee. And so we actually feed them something substantial with protein. So taking care of the physical need. Every rehearsal, we end rehearsal with the time of somebody on the team leading a devotional, and then we all pray together. And so fostering that community as a team. That also, again, my team members in the room, plug ears, that also gives me insight. I ask different people intentionally to share each week. Our teams are rotating. We don't have the same band every week, but I ask a different person to share a devotional because I think it's good for the team to hear each other's voices and not just only mine. I also, and my pastor will say this too, like we also need to sit under the word, to sit under scripture and be in service. And like if we're just the ones that are constantly leading, that's not good. Like, we need to sit under that as well. And my team members, I tell them, like, you have the same ability to hear from the Lord that I do. Like, my job title doesn't give me any special privileges to hear from the Lord, because that model of the old covenant priesthood is done. Like, that's not how we function anymore. So it's good for them to hear each other's voice, and it builds community in that way. But it also gives me a gauge, uh, a little insight of where people are spiritually and how they're doing. And then I can follow up if there is something expressed, like maybe I'm wrestling with this spiritually, or I had a really hard week and I'm struggling with this. Like, that gives me insight to kind of to physical need, then that gives me the insight for the spiritual and the emotional need. And then we do I used to do it more often. I used to do once a month, but now we do quarterly, just hangout events, that is full worship and tech team, because I want them to be friends first and foremost. And then as we're serving, it's a lot more fun because you know who you're serving with, but there's a deeper sense of community in that. And then they're able to be in community with others who play their same instrument. So if you're the drummer, you're not getting scheduled with another drummer on the team because we want a drum kit. So that's another way that I encourage community, but then also, I love when I see them volunteering in other ministries in the church or being a part of small group. And yeah, does that answer your question?
That's great.
Okay,
Agree with that.
that's some of my practical. Question, or maybe not questions, just thoughts.
Have you read the book How to Worship a King?
Yeah.
It talks about tabernacle worship and that construct of the old, the three layers of the tabernacle, and then Jesus is completing the word. You have there's a ton How to Worship a King. Yeah, but it's really fascinating. It's kind of explores that entire world, which I always felt really interesting.
Yeah.
Parallels. Seems obvious when you put them together, but it might not be for maybe even your team members that are thinking about worship in a new context versus the old.
Well, and even for me, like, for so long, the Old and the New Testament felt disjointed, and they didn't feel connected. It just felt like they were these kind of separate books almost. And I think there's a lot of people who maybe just want to bypass the Old Testament. I'll just read the New Testament. I'll just start with the Gospels, and that's good enough. And can you have a relationship with Jesus and an understanding of who he is just reading the Gospels? Yeah. But I think that you're missing out on such rich and deep context of just understanding, even again, just in part because our brains are not able to comprehend the goodness of God, but just understanding more of who he is and what he's done.
Prophetic too.
Yeah. Yeah. The Old Testament, all the prophecies, like it's pointing to Jesus, and that's how and why is the fulfillment of that.